Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and I am here today to do a book haul revisit for the month of March. If you are unfamiliar, this is where I look back at books that I hauled and did a video about in the month of March, as long as I have had a BookTube channel. This is an exciting one because this is the first time that I have 6 years of book hauls to look back at. When I first started my channel in January of 2019, I was trying to be cool the first 2 months that I had it and say, everybody does book hauls. I'm not going to do book hauls. And by March, I thought to myself, well, that's silly because I like talking about the books that I bring into my library. So I did my first book haul in March of 2019. We are going to start with the most recent book haul, which is March of 2024, and work our way back in time to see how many of these books I've read, how many I have unhauled. My watch out criteria is how many books I unhauled without reading. So I'm going to keep stats for all of these, but that's the one that I really want to pay attention to. And I'll also keep track of how many of these books I ended up listening to on audio. It's a big pile of books, as you can see. And I think how many I end up listening to on audio is an interesting statistic, but it's not particularly meaningful to me. So it's interesting to track, but I don't particularly mind. Maybe that's because I don't really spend money on audiobooks. I use Libby and I have Libro, so I guess I do spend money on audiobooks, but it's cashing in a credit, so it doesn't feel like spending money. So we'll start going through these. I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about what these books are about because, again, 6 years of book hauls to get through, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time describing each book. If you want information about the book, I will link the original book haul videos in the description box down below, so you can go there and you get all the information you want. You will also see a lot more books, in some cases, in those original book haul videos. For the sake of timing, I have removed any books that I purchased for my Pulitzer Prize project. If you're unfamiliar, I'm reading every book that has won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and I decided I wanted to own all of those books. And more recently, I have been seeking out other books by those authors and bringing them into my library. So they are purchased for a specific reason. And I really only want to be thinking about books that I purchased for myself with the intention or hope of reading that book soon. And as such, I'm also going to remove any books that were gifted to me. I'm going to remove library builders because it's kind of the same purpose as the Pulitzer Prize project. Like if I decide I want to own every book by Louise Erdrich or Toni Morrison, it's a very different project than just purchasing something with the hope that I would read it. I am also removing books that I had already read when I purchased them because that means I liked the book enough that I wanted to have a copy in my library. And I am, again, only including books that I purchased with the intention of reading that book sometime soon at the time I did it. So let's jump in and start with March of 2024. As I said, we will begin with the most recent and we'll work our way back to the past and see how I have done. It's going to be an interesting one because there are some really great successes and some pitfalls as well. So the first book that I brought into my library 1 year ago in March of 2024 was James by Percival Everett. No surprise, this was one of the most anticipated books of 2024, if not the most anticipated book of 2024, at least in, I hate using the word, but like literary circles, because Percival Everett has been really on the rise in the book world ever since he was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for a book called Telephone, and then his next book, The Trees, was a finalist for the Booker Prize. James was a finalist for the Booker Prize. It won the National Book Award. Yeah, big things are expected. I'll be working on my Pulitzer Prize predictions soon. You can bet this will be featured in them. I purchased a signed copy from Parnassus Books in Nashville. There is the signature. It makes me feel good to know that there are authors whose signatures are not great, just like me. I have read this. I did end up listening to it on audio, but again, I don't really mind. I just figured this is a book that I was going to read, people were going to be talking about, and there is a distant hope for the Pulitzer at some point. So I have read it. I listened to it on audio. I don't mind. I'm happy having the book here. And then I knew even if I listened to the audio I would probably still enjoy having the book here. The same is true of Radiant, The Life and Line of Keith Haring. This is a biography of Keith Haring, as you can guess. I am a big fan. And I knew when I bought this that I was going to listen to it on audio. I have learned doing these book haul revisits that I am much more likely to read a nonfiction book through audio than I am in print. And I knew that would be the case with this one, which is a brick of a book. So really, I wanted to spend money on it because I think it's a really interesting project. I like to support publishers and authors who do things that I find interesting. And it's also a really beautifully put together book. And as someone who's a fan of Keith Haring, it felt like a great book that I would want to have on my shelf, even as a bit of a piece of art itself. And it has great photographs inside and pictures of Keith Haring's art. So yeah, I read this. I did it on audio. I knew I wanted the book anyway. So that's where we're at with that. I considered removing Mean Spirit by Linda Hogan from this book I'll revisit because technically at least half of my motivation to purchase this book was because of my Pulitzer Prize project. This was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction the year that John Updike won for Rabbit at Rest. It was his second Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And therefore, there's a connection to my Pulitzer Prize project. This is one of those books that I brought into my library because it's adjacent to that project. So I could have very easily removed this on that criteria. But the other reason I purchased this book is that Killers of the Flower Moon came out, and a lot of people started recommending Mean Spirit to me because Mean Spirit is essentially the story of Killers of the Flower Moon in a novel form. So that made me really interested. And for that reason, I decided to leave it here and hold myself accountable to read it at some point. Yes, it is kind of for my Pulitzer Prize project, but all of these rules and distinctions are arbitrary anyway, so I included it. I have not read it yet. I will at some point. Again, it's adjacent to my Pulitzer Prize for fiction project. The real timing question with this is I am so reluctant to read more John Updike that I don't know when I'll get to Rabbit at Rest, which is the fourth book in that series. And oh man, it hurts. Then there's Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. I had read all of the Heartstopper books and realized in March of last year that I hadn't gotten what is currently the most recent Heartstopper book. I believe there's one more coming out, and I believe that is supposed to be the final. I did read this book, and I enjoyed it. I have enjoyed all of the Heartstopper books, so that's a success story as well. The final book from March of 2024 is State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. And actually, now that I think about it, because this didn't occur to me until right now, this probably meets the criteria of library building. Ann Patchett has become an author that I kind of want to collect her books, but I'm still early in that process. So, and I'm also filming right now as this realization has dawned on me. So we're going to leave it as it is. I might reconsider next year just because that's why I purchased this book. It's Ann Patchett. I read Tom Lake. I got really excited, and I have been sort of collecting her books so I can read them at some point. And I'm trying to collect them in hardcover as well. I have not gotten around to this one yet. So in March of 2024, I brought 5 books into my library, and I have read 3 of them. That's a great track record, and we're only a year out from these. According to Google, because I'm terrible at math, that is a 60% success rate, and I'll take that any day. I have not unhauled any of the books that I hauled in March of 2024. Also really great, which of course means I didn't unhaul any books without reading them. And that's great because that, again, is my watch out criteria. I did listen to 2 of the 5 books on audio, which is 40%, which again is interesting, but to me, not meaningful. So there you have it. Let's move back to March of 2023 and a smaller book haul. The first book that I brought into my library in March of 2023 was Becoming Ted by Matt Cain. Joel and I have become huge Matt Cain fans. So this was released in the UK. Basically, the timeline we're on now is that his books come out in the UK, and then a year later they might come out in the United States. So we ordered this from the UK because we wanted to have a copy to read right away. And we both read it. So it's a success story. And if you haven't read Matt Cain, cinnamon bun goodness right here. Love it. The next one was Whose Names Are Unknown by Sonora Babb. This book had been mentioned to me when I was preparing to read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck as part of my Pulitzer Prize for Fiction project. So again, we're sort of in a space where, like Mean Spirit, I could take this one out because there's that adjacent to my Pulitzer Prize for Fiction project. But again, these rules are arbitrary. So I'm just going to leave it in because I like this book and I want to recommend it to more people, which of course means I did read it. I did listen to it on audio, but again, I don't mind. And this is actually not even the copy of the book that I purchased in 2023. I gave that copy to someone else so they would read it. And then I replaced it because I knew that my local used bookstore had another copy. So I purchased another copy. And I gave it away. And then I purchased another copy and I gave it away. So I'm on my fourth copy of this book. I just keep handing them out because I want people to read them. So let this be a PSA to you. Get to know Whose Names Are Unknown by Sonora Babb. It is a great, great book. And I'll link the video I did where I discuss the connection between this book and The Grapes of Wrath. It's a long story, but it's an interesting one. It's a really interesting story. So that will be down below if you would like to check that out. I almost grabbed the next pile, but we have to talk about some stats here first. So there were, I forgot to talk about the third book too. A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. I'm doing great today. I did read that book. It's very short. It's a novella, and I only thought it was okay. So I decided to unhaul it. So of the 3 books that I brought into my library in March of 2023, I have read all 3. That's a 100% success rate. Even I can do that math. And again, I'm never going to complain about something like that. That's kind of the goal. You know, it feels lofty sometimes, but that is the goal. And I did unhaul one book, which according to Google is 33% of the book haul. But I had read it, so it does not meet my watch out criteria. And I only did one of them on audio, and that was Sonora Babb's Whose Names Are Unknown. And that, again, according to Google, is a 33% result. Now let's go back to March of 2022, which is an interesting one. The first book I brought into my library that month was Before Night Falls by Reinaldo Arenas. This is a translated book because that year I was doing the LGBTQ plus in translation read along with Jen, the librarian. And we did this sort of structure where we would sort of take turns narrowing the options down to 2, and then we would allow the people who are participating to vote. And then the winner was what everybody would read, and then you had the option of reading the second book as well. So that's going to come into play because I have a copy of the second book as well. It's translated by Dolores M. Koch. So I read it as part of that project, and I think he's a beautiful writer. I thought the book itself was just okay, but it is definitely an interesting enough, queer enough story that I have wanted to keep it on my bookshelves. So for now, at least, it's not going anywhere. The runner-up in the voting for that month was Disoriental by Negar Javadi. And the translator is not on the cover of that one either. It's translated from the French by Tina Cover. There was some very positive reaction to this book in the group among the people who did read it, and that had me interested to try. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So I'm going to hold on to this one, and maybe someday I will catch up to it. I got a copy of All the Young Men by Ruth Coker-Burks with Kevin Carr O'Leary. Joel has actually read this one, and he enjoyed it, with the caveat that there is some level of controversy attached to this book and how accurate it is. I would love to read it at some point myself, so I'm going to hold on to it, and hopefully I will eventually get around to it. And the last book from my March 2022 book haul is A Place Called Winter by Patrick Gale. I consistently hear good things about Patrick Gale from especially people who are in the UK and either have a channel or comment on BookTube videos. And A Place Called Winter is the one that really jumped out to me and sounded interesting. I got it, and I have not managed to read it yet, but I want to. I actually really think about this one all the time when I'm trying to consider what I would like to read next. And it is a shoo-in to be on my pile of possibilities for Pride Month, because in the month of June, I only read queer books, queer authors, queer stories, and anything like that. So I don't know. I have, allow me to think before I start talking. Basically, I make a pile of possibilities and I sort of pull from it. So being on that list is not a guarantee that I will read it, obviously, since I didn't get to it last year or in 2022, but I would really like to. And the more time gets away from me and I haven't caught up to it, the more I start to think I need to make this happen. So maybe this June will be the time. Of course, you can read queer books anytime in the year, but it at least adds a sense of urgency, like, hey, this is the time to do that. So I brought 4 books into my library in March of 2022. I've only read one, and that was Before Night Falls. That is 25%. I can do that math too. I didn't even need Google for that. I haven't unhauled any, which is great, which of course means I have not unhauled any without reading, which is great. And the only book of those that I read, which was Before Night Falls, is one that I read in print. So I didn't listen to any of them on audio. Let's go back to March of 2021. And there were 3 books. I only have 2. First, Last Call by Elon Green. This is a true crime book, and I don't usually do true crime books, but this was a story of a serial killer who targeted gay men, and how because he targeted gay men, not just because he targeted gay men, also because he dismembered the bodies and left them in different areas, which meant that there was a problem of jurisdiction, and sometimes police departments wouldn't necessarily be talking to each other to realize that the body part that goes with what they found is over there. So basically, a lot of details fell through the cracks. And it is a lot about the victims as well. The killer only comes into the story at the end to talk about how he was captured in the trial. And the notion of putting the victims forward is something I really support in true crime. True crime can really be lurid and sensationalize the killer, and this is not doing that at all. I read it when it first came out in a sort of print audio combo because there are footnotes in this book. And the footnotes are kind of important because the footnote can change the context. Like in one part of the book, someone mentions that they had been to tryouts for, I think it was the Mets. And there's a footnote that says there's no evidence that this actually happened. And I feel like that's really needed context. And there are also, photos and maps in the book. So I did the audio and read the book at the same time. Now, do I count that as something I read in print or something I listened to on audio? Again, these distinctions are kind of arbitrary. I just counted it as something that I listened to on audio. I did listen to it again on audio after, I think it's on Max in the United States. There's a docuseries about this, which is even better than the book. And I would highly recommend that you watch it because it is the kind of true crime that I am interested in. And it was just absolutely fascinating and heartbreaking. So there's that. Then there's Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I had been on a run of good luck with Kazuo Ishiguro when I picked this one up, and I only thought it was okay. Which, of course, means I did read this book. I listened to it on audio, and there's a film adaptation. I can't remember who's directing it, and that could be interesting, but, we'll see. I just thought it was fine. But I do really like this author, so. And to be honest with you, I have considered trading it in at my local used bookstore. The only reason I have really kept it is because it's Kazuo Ishiguro. If it was any other author, well, not any other author, but if it was an author I had never read before, I would have unhauled Clara and the Sun after I read it because I didn't like it enough. But this is the guy who wrote The Remains of the Day, which is fantastic. This is the guy who wrote, oh my God, what? Never Let Me Go. I love Never Let Me Go, despite the fact that I just forgot the name of it. And so for that reason, I'm holding on to it. So in March of 2021, I read 2 out of the 3 books that I brought into my library, which according to Google is 67%. It's over 50%. I always want to be over 50%, or at least around 50% when I get to my final number. So anything over 50% is really great. I unhauled one of those books, which is 33%, and it was without having been read because I forgot to tell you about the 3rd book. I'm doing great today. It was What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coster. And basically, I got that from Book of the Month when I was a member. And one thing I learned early on in Book Haul Revisits is that a lot of the books that I was bringing into my library and not reading were Book of the Month books. And this is exactly that case. So there you go. And I listened to 2 of the books on audio. That's Last Call because I'm counting it as an audio, even though I did a print audio combination, and Clara and the Sun. So that is also 67% of this book haul for March of 2021. Let's take a journey back to March of 2020. There are unhauls here, and I will promise I will remember to talk about them before we get to the actual numbers. But first, let's talk about one that I still have, which is this gorgeous copy of The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This is a translated book that, again, does not have the translator's name on the cover. Translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder. I was obsessed with these vintage Japan books that were put out in the UK, I believe, and I got a bunch of them. This is the only one that I got in the month of March. They have beautiful end papers as well. I keep hearing great things about this book. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, and I would like to fix that at some point. Yeah, this is less than 200 pages, so definitely a novella, and I will get around to reading it. I will. Next, we'll talk about the 2 unhauls. Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I got it because I had liked Euphoria, which was one of Lily King's previous novels. And I guess it just kept sitting on my shelf. And I didn't feel any sense of urgency. And I started hearing some sort of mixed feedback about Writers and Lovers. So ultimately, I just kind of decided, you know what? I feel like this is a case where, because I had a past association with the author, I jumped into buying another one of their books, and maybe that was a mistake. So I ended up giving it to someone. I sent it in the mail to someone. So it counts as an unhaul, but we're just going to call it an unhaul. Then there is The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson, which I purchased and then started thinking, if I'm ever going to read this book, I'm going to do it on audio. And there was a period of time where I didn't have the library setup that I have now. Joel devised this whole arrangement to give me more space for books and, a nice backdrop for videos as well, because he's a nice guy like that. So I was running out of space. Everything was really cramped, and I had to make some tough decisions. And honestly, that's probably also why I got rid of the Naima Coster book and the Lily King book. I really just needed space, and it seemed like if I'm going to read this on audio, why do I need to keep it? So I got rid of it. And you know what? Funny story, I have still not read it. And I don't know that I will, because I enjoyed The Devil in the White City. I had some quibbles with it. And I've only read one other Erik Larson book. And the more I think about it, the more it's like, but I always have quibbles with his work. And I had more quibbles with the other one that I read. So I think I don't know that I would ever get around to it. So that's that. The next one, The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I ordered the UK edition because I thought it was a lot prettier than the American edition. The American edition kind of looked like bad clip art, if I'm being honest. So I wanted to make sure I got it. I did read it, And it would feel silly to have gotten through Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies and not finished the series. So I did finish it. And Hilary Mantel, R.I.P. to a genius, a true genius. So, results for March of 2020. I brought 4 books into my library and I've only read 1. That's 25%. And of course, that 1 is The Mirror and the Light. But I would love to read The Housekeeper and the Professor. So hopefully we'll have a 50% situation with 2 out of 4. But right now, we're at 1 out of 4. I have unhauled 2 out of those 4 books, which is a 50% result. More importantly, I had not read either one of those books when I unhauled them, which means my watch out criteria hits a 50%. And in my total, when we get to the end, that's a number that I would like to see below 15%. So having a 50% hurts my soul a little bit, but it is what it is. Let's go back to March of 2019, the final month that we are going to talk about in this book haul revisits. It's another interesting one. The first book that I had brought into my library back then was Leading Men by Christopher Castellani. I did read that book. Actually, I DNF'd it. I can't remember if I got halfway through or if I got a little more than halfway through, but I was not liking the book. I had loved the premise of it and didn't like the execution. But because I made that good faith effort, I'm counting it as something that I read. And it is no longer here. While I was reading it, because it involves Tennessee Williams, who I really like, I went and purchased a copy of The Night of the Iguana, which is one of his plays that was adapted into a movie with Richard Burton. And I haven't read it yet, but I keep thinking that I might want to read some more plays. I really enjoy reading plays. So maybe I'll get back to that this year. We'll see. But I haven't read it yet. Then was Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which I did read. And I admired the craft of the book. So I actually held on to it for a long time. It was in my library to the point where it was still here when we rearranged the library to make it look like it does now. And, clearly, this gap is largely because of The Mirror and the Light, but I don't have space issues anymore. I think what really made me want to finally unhaul it is that I admired the craft of it and I didn't like the book, which also means I have not read other Sally Rooney books. I feel like she's perfectly fine for people who enjoy her. I am happy to sit this one out. So I had held on to it because I had detailed notes about the book and the craft that went into it and things that I found interesting about the way it was written. But ultimately, that's not really a good reason to hold on to a book. So it's gone. Then we have The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui. This is a graphic memoir. This is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend this book. It hits a lot of the things that I find interesting in nonfiction and in fiction as well. It is a generational family story. It's about generational trauma and how things that happen in the past sort of have ripple effects that go into the future. And it is so good. Then we have Speak No Evil by Uzodinma Owela. I had really been looking forward to that book, and I finally got around to reading it on audio because I think I read it during Pride Month one year. And in order to cram it in, I just decided, well, the audio is available. I'm going to do it that way. And I really did not like it. So I got rid of the book. I traded it in at my local used bookstore for credit. That probably helped me get some of the other books in this book haul. And there you have it. Then we have Cloudbursts by Thomas McGuane, which I fully admit I purchased on a whim. I hadn't really heard of this book when I saw it in a bookstore. And I know a lot of people struggle with short story collections. I like them. And I keep telling myself, just like with plays, I want to get back to reading more of them. So when I do, this is probably one of the first that I'm going to pick up. It has a Montana connection, and I can't remember exactly what it is that maybe it was the description on the back, but, or maybe it's the fact that the New York Times Book Review calls him a master of the short story in a blurb on the cover. But I felt compelled to buy it, and I see it on my bookshelf a lot, and I think I would love to read that. So it's not going anywhere, and hopefully I will get around to reading it sometime soon. The Largesse of the Sea Maiden, stories by Dennis Johnson, is something I also purchased. It's also short stories, and just like with Cloudburst, I would love to get around to reading it sometime soon. I do occasionally see it on my shelf because of this blue color that stands out fairly well. I am a fan of Dennis Johnson, and this was, I believe, his last book. And I think it was published posthumously. I can't remember when exactly he died. And part of me had hoped that he would get that elusive Pulitzer Prize for fiction that he never got. And alas, it didn't happen. Someday I would really like to read it, though, so it's not going anywhere. And the final book in this book haul revisit is Spectacles, a memoir by Sue Perkins. Yes, Sue Perkins, one of the original co-hosts of the Great British Bake Off. I got her memoir and I read it. And like with a lot of celebrity memoirs, it's really good when she's young because it feels honest. And then as she grows up and, gets a career in television, it starts to feel like she's trying as hard as possible to be surface level and not really go in deep. And there are some areas where she kind of does in a way that is enough for me to hold on to the book. But it definitely had that sense of remove as she got famous. But if you're a Bake Off fan, it's also funny, just like Sue Perkins. So, March of 2019, 8 books. I've read 5. That is a 63% success rate. And I love that. I love that. I unhauled 2 out of those 8 books, which is 25% of that book haul. But I had read both of those books, so my watch out criteria is a big fat 0, and I'm happy about that. I only listened to 1 of the 5 books that I read on audio, which is 13% of the overall book haul for that year. Now, let's talk about general statistics for this 6 years of book hauls that we have just revisited. In the last 6 Marches, I brought 27 books into my library. I've brought more if you watch the book hauls, but I've brought 27 into my library that count for our purposes today. I've read 15 of them. That is a 56% success rate. And as I said, I like the results to be somewhere around 50%. So to be over 50% feels really good right now. Feels really good. I have unhauled 6 out of those 27 books, which is 22%. Not bad. I don't mind unhauling a book, but not bad that the number is that low. And here's my watch out criteria. Again, this is a number that I would like to keep at or below 15% because I'm trying to be more intentional with how I purchase books. So I have unhauled 3 out of the 27 books without reading them. That sounds like a great number, but it is 11% according to Google. So it's sort of approaching that watch out number. So it'll be interesting to see if that number goes up or if that number goes down in a year when I have 7 years of book hauls to revisit. So we'll see what happens. And of course, if I get around to The Largesse of the Sea Maiden and some of the other books that I mentioned, like Patrick Gale, maybe it will stay strong. We'll find out. And I read 7 out of that 27 on audio, which is 26%. So all in all, not bad. 56%, I will take that anytime. And in terms of books that I have read. And 11%, it's still under 15%. It's a little close for comfort, but there it is. If you have read any of these books, if you have recommendations based on my interest or my feedback on any of these books, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, thank you to Doris for the inspiration. Doris from Aldi Books started doing book haul revisits. She doesn't do them anymore, but I sort of took the idea from her and ran with it. And as always, thank you to you for watching your video. Watching my video. I appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.